You will submit your $8,000 salary every month to me or I marry your rich sister, he threatened, his tone smooth, calculated, and dripping with arrogance. I remember staring at him, trying to process the insanity of what he had just said. My name is Graham Dorset, I'm 31 and I work as a structural engineer. I've built bridges and skyscrapers that hold thousands of lives every day, yet in that moment I couldn't even hold myself together. Victor Langley, my sister's fiancé, had cornered me in the parking lot outside a family gathering. He leaned casually against his car like he was asking for a cigarette, not blackmailing me for my entire livelihood. My sister Isla is 29. After our parents passed, she inherited their fortune, something I never resented. She deserved it. She was their caretaker in the end, their pride and joy. But now that money had made her a target. And the vulture circling her was Victor. To Isla he was charming, attentive, and ambitious. To me he was nothing more than a manipulative opportunist who had somehow charmed his way into her heart. When he first pulled me aside, I thought maybe he wanted to ask for my blessing or maybe advice about proposing. Instead, he dropped his demand like it was the most natural thing in the world. My entire salary in exchange for his silence. His reasoning was cruelly simple. If I didn't pay up, he'd go through with marrying Isla and bleed her dry. In his twisted logic, I had two choices: hand over my life's work every month or stand by while my sister lost everything. I felt my chest tighten as though the walls around me were closing in. I wanted to hit him, scream, drag Isla out of his grip. But one look into his smug eyes told me he wanted me to lash out, wanted me to break and give him the satisfaction of my rage. Instead, I stood frozen, calculating. Victor had me pinned between two unbearable outcomes: sacrifice my own future or risk Isla's. That night, lying awake in my small apartment, I realized I was trapped in a game I hadn't agreed to play. Victor thought he had won before I even took my first move. He had no idea I wasn't going to play by his rules forever. Isla's smile glowed in a way I hadn't seen since before our parents passed. She looked at Victor like he had hung the stars in the sky, and no matter how many times I tried to peel back that illusion, she clung to it as if it were oxygen. I'd pull her aside quietly, testing my words, trying not to sound harsh. Just slow down with him. You don't know everything. She'd laugh it off, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear like I was the younger sibling nagging instead of the older one warning. Graham, you're overthinking again. Victor's not what you think. He's good to me. It was maddening. Victor knew exactly how to play her, how to play everyone. Around friends and extended family, he was this shining beacon of generosity. He'd cover checks at restaurants, offer to help with errands, act like he was invested in every conversation. People ate it up, nodding along, telling me how lucky Isla was to have found him. Meanwhile, I sat at the edge of the table with the sour taste of knowing no one believed me. The worst part was how skillfully he painted me as the bitter one. At a dinner one night, Victor leaned back in his chair, swirling his glass, flashing that infuriating grin. You know, Isla, your brother's got the hardest job in the world, making numbers hold up steel. Too bad it doesn't pay much compared to the hours he puts in. Laughter rippled around the table, light and careless. He'd framed it as a joke, but his eyes locked on mine with deliberate malice. I clenched my jaw, pretending it didn't sting. Isla chuckled along, not catching or refusing to catch the edge buried in his words. Don't tease him, Victor, she said gently, but there was no real defense in her tone. The comment had already landed, leaving me feeling smaller at my own sister's side. She didn't realize she was siding with him by dismissing my silence. Walking home later, I felt the weight of her arm looped in his instead of mine. That bond we once had, the one where we shared secrets after curfew, where she trusted me first before anyone, felt like it was slipping through my fingers. And Victor was the one prying it loose, smiling all the while. Every 2 weeks, like clockwork, I found myself standing in front of Victor, sliding over an envelope I could barely afford to fill. He'd count it slowly, the smirk spreading across his face as though he were savoring every second of my humiliation. Good boy, he'd murmur, tucking the bills into his jacket as if I were nothing more than a subordinate handing over dues. My stomach twisted every time, but fear for Isla kept me chained to the ritual. The cost of his greed hit me fast. I stopped eating out with friends, offering flimsy excuses about deadlines and fatigue. Groceries became a puzzle of cheap staples and skipped meals. My once tidy apartment grew colder, the heating bill sacrificed so I could keep up with his demands. I'd stare at my reflection in the bathroom mirror some nights, cheeks thinner, eyes hollow, wondering how long before someone noticed. At work I wore the mask well. My colleagues joked about happy hours, weekend getaways, new cars. I nodded along, laughing in the right places, never admitting that I was scraping pennies together to cover rent. When my boss asked if I was okay, I brushed it off with a practiced smile, blaming long projects and sleepless nights. The truth stayed locked in my chest, burning like acid. Victor, of course, reveled in my decline. After one exchange, he leaned close, his breath hot with triumph. "You'd be nothing without that paycheck. And now even that belongs to me." The words sliced through me sharper than any blade. I wanted to scream, to punch, to tell Isla everything. But the image of her face, her devastation if she discovered what I'd failed to stop, kept me silent. Each payment was another weight around my neck, dragging me lower, isolating me further. Friends stopped calling as I turned down plans again and again. My phone became quieter, my nights lonelier. It wasn't just the money he was stealing. It was my dignity, my connection to the world, my sense of self. And yet, I showed up every time with the envelope, teeth clenched, pretending I still had control of anything at all. The first signs appeared in the smallest details. Victor strutted into gatherings with designer shoes that I knew hadn't been in his closet a month earlier. He boasted about tasting rare wines, flashing receipts from places no one had seen him work to afford. The numbers didn't add up, but everyone else seemed blinded by the glow of his charm. To them he was thriving. To me he was a parasite. It wasn't just him. I started noticing changes in Isla too. She used to pour her energy into causes she cared about. Charity events, art commissions, things that kept her grounded. Lately her calendar was blank. When I asked why she'd cancelled an exhibit she'd been planning for months, she shrugged, saying softly, "Victor thinks it's not the right time. He says it's better I save my energy." There was no fire in her eyes, only a quiet resignation that twisted my gut. One evening I spotted him pulling into a restaurant valet with Isla's sleek car, the one she cherished because it had been our father's last gift. Watching him climb out like it belonged to him ignited something sharp in my chest. Days later he lifted his wrist to check the time, and I caught the glint of a new watch I knew Isla had purchased. His possessions weren't his. They were hers, repurposed to decorate his facade. Piece by piece the picture sharpened. He wasn't just waiting to strip her future. He was already draining her present. Every smile she gave him felt like another piece of her being chipped away. And every moment I kept silent added to my shame. I couldn't stand by and watch anymore. My anger settled into something heavier, something sharper than impulse. This wasn't about hating him. It was about protecting her. If I wanted to break through the wall he'd built around Isla, I needed more than warnings and suspicions. I needed undeniable proof. That night, lying awake, I mapped it out in my mind. He thought he'd buried me beneath threats and silence, but he'd made one mistake. He underestimated the strength of the brother who'd rather burn himself to ash than watch his sister be consumed. The hunt for the truth had to begin, and I was ready to start digging. It was during a business trip to Denver that the truth began unraveling. I had been reviewing blueprints late at a hotel cafe when I saw Victor across the lobby, arm in arm with a woman who wasn't Isla. She kissed his cheek before they disappeared into the elevator. My chest tightened, rage surging, but I forced myself to remain still. When I returned home I started digging. A quiet word with a mutual acquaintance in Chicago, a casual scroll through tagged photos in a local gallery, and the picture grew darker. Different women in different cities, all clinging to him the way Isla did. He wasn't just betraying her heart. He was multiplying his lies across state lines. Weeks later, after another one of our miserable transactions, he staggered toward me in the alley behind a bar, the stench of whiskey thick on his breath. He leaned close, his words slurred but razor-sharp. "You're paying me to ruin your sister's life. Can you taste it yet? The joke's on you." He laughed, a jagged, ugly sound that echoed in my skull. My fists clenched so tight my nails cut into my palms. Every muscle in my body screamed to strike him, to end it right there under the flickering streetlight. For one violent second, I imagined his smirk wiped clean, the satisfaction stripped from his face. But I didn't move. I couldn't. If I laid a hand on him, I'd be the one in cuffs, and Isla would be left alone with the predator she thought she loved. So I swallowed the fire, forcing my hands into my pockets, letting him stumble away into the night. The restraint tasted bitter, but in that bitterness, clarity formed. He thrived on chaos, on pushing me to the edge. If I wanted to end him, I couldn't play into his game. I needed to build my own. That night I made a promise to myself. No more warnings, no more empty words to Isla. The time for pleading was over. I would gather evidence so strong, so undeniable, that even Victor couldn't talk his way out of it. He thought he was untouchable, but his arrogance had already left cracks. All I had to do was collect the pieces and fit them together until his empire of lies collapsed around him. I started small, careful not to tip my hand. Every receipt Victor left on the counter when he thought no one was watching, every bank notification that flashed across Isla's phone when she left it unattended, I documented it all. Screenshots filled a hidden folder on my laptop. Unexplained withdrawals, transfers that bled from her accounts into ones with his name attached. Each digital breadcrumb told the story he thought he could bury. Still, money wasn't enough. I needed more. So I trailed him, blending into the background of his routines. A late afternoon, I saw him slip into a coffee shop downtown. Minutes later, a woman joined him. Dark hair, sharp features, her hand lingering on his arm with practiced familiarity. Her name, I would later learn, was Lydia Crane. Watching them together confirmed everything I already knew. Isla wasn't his only anchor. Patience rewarded me when Lydia left alone. I approached her cautiously the next day, introducing myself not as Isla's brother, but as someone who knew what it felt like to be played. To my surprise, she didn't slam the door in my face. She listened, bitterness clouding her expression. He told me I was the only one, she spat, pulling out her phone. Message threads, intimate photos, promises of a future. Evidence she'd been saving, maybe out of anger, maybe out of self-preservation. She handed them over with a trembling hand, her voice cracking. If you're taking him down, make sure it hurts. Piece by piece, the folder grew heavier. Texts, transfers, photos, recordings. It became an arsenal. Every addition steadied me, hardening my resolve. I no longer felt like a man cornered, but like one laying the groundwork for justice. With the wedding date looming, time pressed against my ribs like a ticking clock. I couldn't wait for Isla to stumble across the truth on her own. Victor had woven the net too tightly. No, this had to end publicly, decisively, in a way he couldn't twist into another performance. One night, staring at the glowing files on my screen, I made the choice final. The engagement party would be the stage. The guests would be the audience. And Victor, smug and unsuspecting, would be the star of his own unraveling. The ballroom glittered with chandeliers, the kind of place where every detail screamed excess. Isla floated through the crowd in an elegant dress, her joy so bright it almost masked the sickness twisting in my stomach. Guests toasted the couple with glasses of champagne, photographers snapping every smile. To them it was a fairy tale. To me it was a stage built for collapse. I kept my posture relaxed, shaking hands, offering congratulations, playing the role of the supportive brother no one suspected was carrying a storm beneath his calm. Victor thrived under the attention, moving through the crowd like a politician, charming relatives and business acquaintances alike. When he finally reached me, his hand clamped on my shoulder, his breath brushing my ear. "Don't forget your next payment," he murmured, venom wrapped in honey. My pulse kicked hard, but I didn't flinch. Instead, I turned to him with a smile so smooth it caught him off guard. He thought he'd won, and that belief was the perfect weapon. I'd already arranged the trap. The projector sat quietly at the back of the room, disguised in plain sight. No one gave it a second thought. It was common to play slideshows at events like this, memories of childhood and milestones leading up to the engagement. Victor himself had nodded at the idea when Isla mentioned it, too full of pride to imagine it could be turned against him. As the music dimmed and the host invited everyone to gather, I positioned myself near the controls. My palms were damp, my chest tight, but I reminded myself of the folder waiting on my drive, the arsenal built piece by piece. Tonight wasn't about me anymore. It was about freeing Isla from the web he had spun around her. The lights lowered and laughter filled the air as the first images appeared. Family vacations, childhood birthdays, snapshots of a life once untouched by deceit. Isla squeezed Victor's hand, her eyes shining with nostalgia. He basked in it, certain this moment only strengthened his image. What he didn't know, what he couldn't know, was that beneath those warm pictures lay the fuse. And I was ready at last to light it. The room was warm with laughter as familiar images flickered across the screen. Vacations at the lake, birthdays crowded with candles, snapshots of Isla and me in simpler years. Guests clapped, some wiping their eyes at the nostalgia. Even I felt a tug at my chest before the shift came. With one keystroke, the glow of innocence dissolved, replaced by something darker. Numbers filled the screen. Statements, withdrawals, transfers traced with precision. At first there was confusion, then murmurs that swelled like a wave rolling through the hall. Faces turned toward Victor, searching for explanation. Before he could spin a word, another slide cut through. Photographs of him in cities where Isla had never been, arms around women who weren't her. Gasps scattered the room like broken glass. The joy that had filled Isla's eyes only minutes ago drained away, her hands trembling as she pulled them from his grip. Victor lurched forward, shouting for the projector to be shut off. He reached for the cable, but I had already secured the backup. With a calmness I barely recognized in myself, I pressed play on the final piece. A recording, his voice unmistakable, dripping with malice. "You will hand over your 8,000 every month, or I'll marry your sister and take her for everything." The words hung heavy, echoing across the stunned silence. Conversations halted, champagne flutes lowered mid-air. Victor froze, the color draining from his face as the reality of exposure settled in. There was no charm to hide behind now, no polished grin to rescue him. Isla stared at him as if seeing a stranger, her body rigid, her mouth parted in disbelief. The betrayal was no longer invisible. It was carved in sound and light for every witness in the room. My heart pounded, not from fear, but from the release of truth finally laid bare. No one moved. The silence stretched, suffocating. Victor's mask, so carefully crafted, so meticulously performed, shattered before the eyes of everyone he had sought to impress. And for the first time since this nightmare began, I felt the weight begin to lift. Isla's chair scraped loudly against the polished floor as she rose, her face pale but her voice steady. "How long, Victor?" she demanded, her hands shaking though her eyes never left him. "How long have you been lying to me?" The silence of the crowd pressed in, everyone waiting for his answer. Instead of remorse, he laughed, a bitter, jagged sound. "You're pathetic," he spat, his charm stripped bare. "Pathetic and weak. You think you could have held on to me without your money? You were nothing but a means to an end." Gasps rippled through the room, the final nail hammered into his coffin by his own words. Isla's tears welled, but her chin lifted higher, strength rising from the cracks of her heartbreak. He shoved his chair back, muttering curses, and made for the exit. Several guests stepped in, blocking his path, hands firm on his arms as he thrashed. His composure, once his greatest weapon, was gone, replaced by the frantic desperation of a man exposed. He shouted at anyone close enough to hear, but his words only confirmed what the evidence had already shown. While he struggled, Isla's closest friends circled around her, pulling her into their embrace. My aunt, ever the practical one, was already dialing her attorney, murmuring sharp instructions about fraud and extortion charges. Others whispered about restraining orders, about ensuring he could never come near her again. The same community that had once admired Victor now turned its back on him completely. Former allies shook their heads, distancing themselves, unwilling to be connected to his downfall. His name, once spoken with respect, now carried the bitter taste of betrayal. I watched from across the room as Isla steadied herself, wiping at her cheeks. The devastation was still etched across her face, but there was something else there now: clarity. She saw him for what he truly was, and she finally believed me. Victor's empire of lies had collapsed, not quietly, but in front of every witness that mattered. And the man who once thought himself untouchable stood broken, with nothing left but his own disgrace. The days that followed were a blur of paperwork, calls, and meetings, but Isla moved through them with a steel I hadn't seen in her before. She met with her lawyer, voice steady as she laid out everything she wanted pursued: fraud, coercion, extortion. Victor was to be cut out of her life entirely, not just personally but legally, financially, in every way that tied him to her name. His messages, his accounts, the trail he'd left behind, each became another brick in the case being built against him. One evening, when the house finally grew quiet, Isla sat across from me at the kitchen table. Her hands twisted nervously in her lap before she looked up, eyes glistening. "Tell me everything," she whispered. For the first time I let it all out. The parking lot threats, the envelopes of money, the months of fear I'd carried alone. My voice cracked more than once, but I didn't stop until the truth was laid bare between us. Tears slipped down her cheeks as she reached across the table, gripping my hand. "I'm so sorry," she choked out. "I should have listened. I should have trusted you." I shook my head, squeezing back. "He fooled everyone, Isla. You don't owe me an apology." But she insisted, promising through broken sobs that from now on, neither of us would face anything like this alone again. In that moment, the weight I'd been dragging for so long finally loosened. The fear, the shame, the endless silence. It all seemed to dissolve in the warmth of her forgiveness. For the first time in months, I could breathe without feeling like someone was tightening a rope around my chest. As I lay awake that night, the house quiet except for Isla's soft movements upstairs, I thought back to the night Victor cornered me, to the smug certainty in his eyes when he delivered his ultimatum. He believed he had written the ending already, that I would fold, that my silence was his forever. But he was wrong. He thought he could buy my silence with threats, but instead he gave me every reason to destroy him. Do you think I made the right choice exposing Victor and cutting him out, or should I have handled it differently? Share your thoughts in the comments and don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell for more stories.